The gymnastics method to learn the planche fast is not only due to one factor, but it's multiple put together, as I mentioned in my other gymnast video. But what I didn't mention in that video was probably the most important factor, which was their training periodization. In other words, their training plan. So we now know the gymnastics method to progress in the planche so fast is down to their training periodization. But the next question is, how do they periodize their training, and what exactly does that mean, and what specific exercises are they doing in that period of training? Well, in order to answer that question, we need to look at gymnastics as a sport to see how does it work and what physiological performance aspects gymnasts are trying to optimize and increase so that they actually do well at gymnastics and are able to perform all those crazy skills we all love seeing. Of course, gymnasts are athletes, so their main purpose is to perform as well as they can and hopefully gain some medals at competitions and or meets, where meets are kind of smaller competitions that they kind of use for practice. So their goal is to go through training cycles to increase their performance each time so that they're as ready as they can be for these competitions, in order to place as high as possible to gain some medals and gain access to even greater competitions and more opportunities. And well, in order to place high, their routines, which are performed on different apparatus such as the pommel horse or steel rings, these are judged by a panel of judges. The judging occurs as follows. The athletes are given 2 scores at the end of their routine. A D score, which is a difficulty score, and an E score, which is an execution score. Gymnasts start with an execution score of 10 and have points deducted depending on what faults they have. So they might have minor faults where they step out of line or have slightly bent legs, or if they're major faults, then they have more points deducted. The rating, difficulty, and points given for a specific skill is stated in the code of points, which is basically a full manual telling you how hard a skill is and how many points you'll get for performing that skill perfectly. So the problem with judging some sports, especially in calisthenics as well, is that the judging can be very subjective. So obviously in gymnastics, the judges don't watch the replay back of the routine. They're watching in real time and trying to score in real time. So that means the same ring routine at one competition could score 8.1 for its execution, but the same exact routine at a different competition could score 8.8, for example. So it's a little bit subjective. So to combat this, gymnasts aren't thinking, oh, how can I get the most amount of points from the judges? Where can I get my points? Points. They're not really thinking that. Rather, they're thinking, how can I increase my performance so that I can perform those hard skills, those hardest skills I can do with perfect execution so I get no points deducted. This is why they focus more on performance, increasing performance, so they can perform the best routine they possibly can on the day. When they focus on increasing their performance, what this results in is maximum power output, smooth transitions, and perfect dismounts. This is much better than being fixated on the points and whether or not they'll get it due to that subjective judging. This is not to say they don't care about points at all. Of course, they need to care about the points because that's how they're going to win at the end of the day, but that's not the focus in their training. Their focus is on performance and doing the skills correctly with correct execution. So we now know gymnasts don't focus on judging, but rather they focus on peaking their performance at various times of the year when they have competitions or meets, so that they can perform the hardest routine they can with the best execution they can. So the next question is, how do gymnastic coaches periodize the training so that they can peak at different times of the year and perform at their best at those times? This brings us onto macro cycles. So before I go on to talk about macro cycles and training periodization of gymnasts, I just want to note that as bodyweight athletes and calisthenics athletes, we don't want to fully copy gymnasts and the way they train, because they train specifically for specific strength aspects and flexibility aspects and are a different population entirely. They start at very early ages, they train very specifically for what they need to do in competition. That's not the same for us. Specificity is king, so we want to train for our given sports or whatever performance aspects we want to increase. So we don't want to copy gymnasts entirely, but there are some fundamental strength principles for bodyweight training that gymnasts do that we do want to follow. And many calisthenics athletes aren't following any strength principles at all, which means you're leaving gains on the table. And with that said, let's go on to macro cycles. So luckily, we don't have to guess how gymnasts train and periodize their training. There's one YouTube channel, Shift Movement, that has done a full lecture breaking down an example of training periodization for gymnasts. The creator is a gymnastics coach and made a full lecture, so if you want to check it out, link will be in the description, but we're going to break that down and explain the periodization in this video. Okay, so as we mentioned, gymnasts want to peak their performance at different times of the year according to the competitions and meets that they have to do, and one of the ways they need to do that is by planning out the macrocycles, mesocycles, and microcycles. If you don't know what any of those are, you need to check out my strength principles videos on bodyweight training. That will help break down all of those concepts, but for now I'll do a brief explanation. A macrocycle is a season of training, so maybe 2 to 3 months. So this is very variable, but the gist of it is that it's a long-term period of training. You then have mesocycles, which are training blocks. These are shorter periods of time, anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks, and then you'll take a deload and do these blocks again. And then lastly, you have microcycles, which is the smallest unit of time period measurement for training plans, and that's usually 1 week. In order to plan the macrocycles, the coach needs to know the long-term goal of the athlete. Is it to go to nationals next year? Is it to use this year to practice specific skills, and then next year you really aim for a hard, difficult meet at the end of the year? You need to know that end goal so that you can really plan for this year and the next coming months. It's like kind of setting sail on a ship. You need to know those end coordinates, that end heading, so you don't waste any resources on that journey. This is something I recommend you do in your own training, is what is the specific long-term goal? You need to define that for yourself so that you can plan accordingly, so you slowly work towards that goal. Even if it's not for like 2 years time, if you just know what it is that you want to accomplish for the end of this year, that's a great start. So this is an example of how a gymnast and a gymnastics coach would look at the long-term plan of the year, breaking it down from the long-term goal. So as you can see, they start with a multi-year goal, so that's a very long-term goal. So for some athletes, this might be making it to the Olympics, for example. Then they go to an individual year goal. So for this year, what is it you want to achieve? So maybe it's to work towards the biggest meet of the year. So you get that practice in and you really train those hard skills for that meet. Next would be the months or blocks. So according to that meet or whatever competition you have that year, then you could then know what is your off season, what's your pre-season, and when you'll be in season. After that, you can manage the blocks, so your blocks of mesocycles, so when will you be loading, so in other words, training and accumulating that fatigue slowly, and then deloading, so getting rid of that load you've just accumulated and getting rid of that fatigue so you come back with greater performance. This is something called supercompensation, which I've broken down in other videos. So once they know their training blocks and mesocycles, then they can go and work towards the individual weeks. What are we doing Monday to Sunday when you come in? What days are you training? Are you only training 5 days a week or 6 days a week? Once they know all that, then they can specifically analyze what they're gonna do day to day. And from there, it gets even more specific depending on the block of training they're in. This is something we as calisthenics and bodyweight athletes can do, because even though we don't all compete as athletes, so not all of us have calisthenics competitions in our countries or in our local areas, we still, even if we're just training for our own personal performance, we still want to be able to peak our performance. That's so we know when we're going to be strongest and can test our maxes and be our personal best. This is how we can keep progressing even if we're not competing. And hey, maybe one day that competition comes to you and you've already been training like an athlete. So here's an example of how a gymnastics coach might plan and periodize the macrocycles for their gymnasts. So as you can see, there's an off-season, a pre-season, an in-season A, and in-season B. And then in the in-season A, they peak once, then they peak again for the more important competition, which will be regionals, which is in season B. So there's 2 peaks in this year and they plan their training around that. Early in the year, it's going to be less specific to training in a competition. It's going to be building more fundamental strength, more conditioning. Then as it gets closer and closer to those 2 meets where they need to peak, it's going to get more specific to creating routines and doing exactly what they need to do in competition. So that was very general, but now we know how in most cases gymnasts plan their training to peak for specific meets, and how us as calisthenics athletes can peak our own performance to surpass gymnasts by using periodization and planning out our macrocycles. But the next question is, how exactly do gymnasts train week to week according to what block or mesocycle they're in. So if they're in off season, what do they do? And if they're in season, how does that differ to off season? What specifically is the difference in their week to week training? Well, that's a good question. And that brings us on to gymnastics performance attributes. There are 3 main attributes within gymnastics that are essential for gymnasts to work on in order to produce a high difficulty and well executed routine. The first is strength, the second is energy systems, and the third is athlete wellness. Okay, quickly let's break down the importance of those 3 attributes and how the training differs according to what period of training the gymnast is in. Out of season mesocycle. The aim of this training block is to increase general gymnastics performance and individual skills. This means for the aspect of strength, they're doing 50% specific strength, so that's going to be specific strength exercises for gymnastics, so that's things like leg raises, hollow body holds, that kind of thing, so specific muscle training for the muscles that will be used in gymnastics routines. Then the other 50% of the volume within this block is going to be on general weight training, so that's going to be things like deadlifts, kettlebell lifts, dumbbells, and using bands. So these are going to be things for general strength. So gymnasts do both. They do both specific strength and general, especially in the off season. The next attribute is energy systems. So energy systems, this is basically cardio, the cardiovascular system. That's because in the gymnastic routines, they can go on for up to like 90 seconds. So that's quite a while to be doing strength routines. So they need to have that cardiovascular system trained as well, so they can perform long combinations, because strength plus endurance equals combinations. So in the off season, to train energy systems, they're doing things like circuits, interval training, 90 seconds of high intensity output, and then resting, and then doing that again, sprints, things like that. And now athlete wellness. This is the general health of the athlete. You need to be keeping on top of this throughout the year, especially yourself as a calisthenics athlete or bodyweight athlete. You need to be keeping on top of your own health so you can keep training at your max potential. So in the off season, they're doing things like individual rehab and prehab. So this is where they can really work on those individual items that they need to focus on. Maybe it's a shoulder injury, wrist injury, that kind of thing. Pre-season mesocycle. So now let's talk about the pre-season and how this training block changes, because now they're going to be a few weeks or months before a competition or meet. So the training is going to differ slightly. This mesocycle is going to be focused on general gymnastics development, skill combinations, half routines, and then moving into full routines. So it gets more specific as you move through the pre-season. You're going to get from general training more into your full routine. So the first attribute, strength. That's going to increase a little bit in terms of specificity for gymnastics. They're going to do about 75% gymnastics specific strength skills, such as rope climbs, pull-ups, that kind of thing, and then 25% general power output. So again, they're going to have that general training in there, but it's going to be a lot more specific training for gymnastics, and that's because they're in the pre-season. They're getting really close to competition time. So now for energy systems or cardio, so of course you'll probably guess they're going to get more specific, because now we're into doing full routines. So it's going to be even more specific at being able to do those routines and increasing the length of those routines. So that's why they start off with half routines, maybe even a bit less, and then start adding on until they get to the full routines where they're doing full strength combinations for full 90 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever it may be. But of course, 25% of the volume for the cardio is going to be just general power output. Things like doing giants on the bar constantly, circuit sprints, jump squats, handstand walks, bar half routines and full routines, and then also tumbling, sled pushes, squat jumps, walking lunges, all of those. In terms of athlete wellness and the health of the athlete in this time before the season starts, they're going to be still doing individual rehab and prehab, and then even more focus on the recovery education, so helping them know specifically what they need to be keeping on top of right before the competition, because maybe they picked up some injuries in the off season. In season mesocycle. So now in terms of gymnastics development, when you're in season, so it's competition time, it's going to be no surprise, you're going to be working pretty much solely on full routines. That's the aim of this training block. So in terms of strength, you're doing 100% gymnastics power work now, so it's fully going to be gymnastics specific because you're in season, so you need to be prepping exactly for what you're going to be doing in competition. In terms of energy systems and cardio, you're going to be doing 100% anaerobic performance. So there's going to be anaerobic workouts, so routines while you're fatigued, so that you get that cardio system up specifically for gymnastics. In terms of athlete wellness, you're going to be increasing preventative care, making sure you're optimizing your sleep, minimizing your stress, all those micro adjustments, because now it's competition time, so you're taking things a lot more seriously, especially your diet as well, things like that. Now again, although us calisthenics athletes were not gymnasts, I think it's very important to kind of focus on your workouts like this, making sure you're including that cardio if you're working on combinations as well, if that's a goal you have, and just for your general health, making sure you're doing your athlete wellness, the prehab, the warm-up, making sure you're educating yourself on what things you need to do to keep yourself performing at your best. It's very important, and I see a lot of calisthenics athletes neglecting this, and it's holding us back from overtaking some of the gymnasts out there. Now there's one other topic we haven't talked about to help increase how fast gymnasts learn the planche, and that's their specific training split. They do something called undulating training, and well, that's a topic for another video. And there are also some other secondary topics such as their mental training, training styles such as using rings and other variations, use of supination, momentum exercises, things like that we also can talk about. Let me know if you want me to discuss those in another video. Thanks to all my channel members, Bryce, AVG, Elbow Pains, Piss, so all you guys in the Discord as well. And watch these strength principle videos because it's going to explain even further how gymnasts train to learn the planche so quick, because like I said at the start, it's not only one factor, but it's multiple put together, and in these videos I explain the other factors.